You never really find out what a cup of coffee is worth until someone is willing to lose everything for it. The morning rush hit Maple and Ash Coffee like a tidal wave of voices, ringing phones, and steaming milk pitchers hissing beneath polished chrome machines. Customers stretched nearly to the front door, bundled against the sharp November chill outside, each one clutching a phone, checking the time, or silently praying the line would move faster. Behind the counter, 24-year-old Emily Carter moved with practiced precision, her auburn hair tied neatly beneath a black visor, her green apron already dusted with tiny flecks of espresso grounds. She smiled at every customer, remembered regular orders without looking at the register, and somehow managed to keep her calm while the digital order screen filled faster than anyone could clear it. She wasn't the fastest barista in the store because she rushed. She was the fastest because she never wasted a movement. 3 years behind that counter had taught her that kindness could move a line better than panic ever could. At exactly 8:17 that morning, the front door chimed again. The cold breeze carried in an elderly man wrapped in a faded brown jacket that looked older than many of the customers waiting in line. His white hair peeked from beneath a weathered navy baseball cap with no logo, no military patch, nothing that asked for attention. Thomas Walker quietly closed the door behind him, giving the people entering after him enough room to pass before slowly making his way toward the end of the line. Nobody greeted him. Nobody recognized him. He simply became another invisible old man standing patiently while younger people sighed dramatically at the wait. Emily noticed him almost immediately. She had seen him twice during the previous month, always alone, always ordering the smallest black coffee on the menu, always counting exact change before reaching the register. Today was different. As Thomas reached into his coat pocket, his expression barely changed, but Emily caught the small hesitation in his hands. He searched every pocket once, then again, then lowered his eyes for only a second. It was a look she recognized because she'd seen it on her own mother after unexpected medical bills arrived. It wasn't embarrassment. It was quiet calculation. Thomas stepped out of line before anyone could notice and slowly turned toward the door without saying a word. Emily glanced toward the office. The manager's door was closed. The security monitor faced the opposite side of the cafe. Before she could second-guess herself, she poured a fresh medium coffee, placed a lid on the cup, and hurried around the counter. "Sir," she called softly. Thomas stopped. "I think you forgot this." He looked at the cup, then back at her. "I didn't pay for it," he replied in a calm voice. Emily smiled. "Then today it's on me." For the first time, the old man's pale blue eyes seemed almost surprised. He accepted the warm cup with both hands as though it were something far more valuable than coffee. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea what this means." Emily simply nodded. "Have a warm morning." Thomas tipped his head in gratitude and reached for the door. He had barely stepped onto the sidewalk when another voice sliced through the cheerful noise of the cafe. "Emily." The single word froze her where she stood. She slowly turned around. Standing beside the office door was store manager Ryan Mitchell, his arms folded tightly across his pressed white shirt. His face carried none of the warmth expected inside a neighborhood coffee shop, only cold disappointment. He had been watching the entire exchange. "My office," he said evenly. "Right now." The espresso machines continued humming. Customers kept talking. Receipts kept printing. Yet for Emily, every sound inside Maple and Ash suddenly felt impossibly far away as she realized that one free cup of coffee had just become the most expensive decision of her life. Ryan Mitchell did not raise his voice. He never had to. The quiet click of his office door closing behind Emily carried more weight than shouting ever could. Outside, the cheerful sounds of steaming milk, clinking ceramic mugs, and customers laughing over breakfast continued as though nothing had happened. Inside the cramped office, only the faint hum of the security monitors disturbed the silence. Ryan folded his hands across the desk and looked at Emily for several long seconds before speaking. "Tell me I did not just watch you give away company inventory without authorization." Emily stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron. She could have lied. She could have claimed the register had glitched or that the customer had already paid. Instead, she met his eyes. "You saw exactly what happened." Ryan leaned back slowly in his chair. "Do you know what company policy says?" "Yes." "Then explain why you ignored it." Emily inhaled quietly before answering. He was leaving because he could not afford one cup of coffee. Ryan shook his head as though he had heard the oldest excuse in the world. That is not your decision to make. Emily remained calm. Maybe not. Definitely not, Ryan corrected. We do not run a charity. Every employee signs the same handbook. Every product leaving this store has to be accounted for. If I let one person decide who gets free coffee, tomorrow somebody else gives away sandwiches. Next week somebody gives away merchandise. Rules exist because feelings change. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment. She understood procedures better than anyone. During 3 years at Maple and Ash Coffee, she had never arrived late, never missed a shift, never received a customer complaint, and never once taken so much as a cookie without paying for it. Her coworkers often joked that Emily treated every shift like it was her own business. They were only half joking. Her paycheck covered rent for the small apartment she shared with her mother on the east side of town. It paid utility bills, groceries, and the medication stacked carefully inside a kitchen cabinet that grew emptier every month. Every dollar already had a destination before it reached her bank account. Losing this job was not an inconvenience. It was a cliff she could not afford to fall from. Ryan rotated one of the security monitors until it faced her. The screen showed the exact moment she had walked around the counter carrying the paper cup. Every movement appeared undeniable beneath the bright ceiling lights. Company property, he said. Given away without authorization. Emily watched herself smile at the elderly customer. Even through the silent video, she remembered the gratitude in his tired eyes. She did not regret what she had done. Emily placed the signed acknowledgement form on Ryan Mitchell's desk with steady hands. But the quiet confidence she carried every morning felt noticeably heavier as she untied her apron and folded it with the same care she used every evening before heading home. Ryan looked at the neatly folded fabric for a moment before sliding a second document across the desk. Pending a corporate review, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. The words were spoken without anger, almost mechanically, as though they had been repeated so many times they had lost their meaning. For Emily, every syllable landed with perfect clarity. She nodded once, refusing to argue. May I collect my things? Ryan answered with a short gesture toward the employee lockers. 5 minutes. She stepped back into the cafe where the morning rush was finally beginning to thin. Fresh pastries filled the display case. Holiday music drifted softly through hidden speakers, and customers continued chatting over warm drinks, completely unaware that one employee's world had quietly shifted beneath her feet. A few coworkers looked up as she walked toward the break room. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others quickly looked away, unwilling to become part of a situation they could not change. Jessica, another barista, quietly caught up with her near the lockers. Emily, what happened? Emily forced a small smile. I broke company policy. Jessica frowned. Over that older gentleman? Emily simply nodded. You know everyone saw him leave because he did not have enough money. That does not matter now, Emily answered gently. Jessica lowered her voice even further. For what it is worth, I would have done the same thing. Emily thanked her, emptied her locker into a worn canvas tote bag, and carefully placed a framed photograph of herself and her mother inside before closing the locker for what she feared might be the last time. As she walked toward the front entrance, the automatic doors opened once again. A gust of crisp autumn air swept across the floor. For one brief second, she thought the elderly customer had returned. Instead, it was a delivery driver balancing 2 large boxes of coffee beans on a handcart. Emily quietly stepped outside. The cold air immediately brushed against her cheeks. She stood beneath the store's green awning for a moment. Looking through the wide front windows at the cafe she had helped open every morning before sunrise for nearly 3 years. Inside, another employee had already taken her position behind the espresso machine. Business moved forward exactly as it always had. Across the street, Thomas Walker had not gone far. He sat alone on a weathered wooden bench beneath a maple tree whose golden leaves drifted lazily onto the sidewalk around him. The paper coffee cup rested between both hands as thin ribbons of steam curled into the chilly air. He had taken only a few careful sips. His eyes were not fixed on the cup. They remained quietly focused on the cafe entrance. He watched Emily emerge carrying her canvas bag. He noticed the missing apron folded neatly over her arm. He noticed the brave smile she offered Jessica before walking away. Most of all, He recognized the familiar look of someone pretending everything would be all right for the sake of everyone else. Thomas slowly lowered his eyes. The warmth from the coffee reached his hands, but a much older memory reached somewhere deeper. Kindness had a way of revealing character long before success ever did. He reached into the inside pocket of his faded jacket and removed a small leather wallet that had clearly been carried for decades. Inside was no cash, no photographs, and no credit cards. Instead, tucked behind a transparent sleeve, rested a single weathered business card embossed with nothing more than a simple silver oak tree and one name beneath it. Thomas Walker quietly studied the card for several seconds before slipping it back into his pocket. Then he pulled out an old flip phone, opened it with practiced ease, and pressed a number from memory. The call connected after only one ring. Thomas spoke only 6 calm words. "Please visit store 184 today." He closed the phone before the person on the other end could ask a single question, finished the last sip of his coffee, and continued sitting silently as golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk. While inside the cafe, nobody realized that one brief phone call had already begun changing far more than a single employee's future. Emily walked the 6 blocks home beneath a gray November sky that threatened rain without ever delivering it. The cold breeze carried the scent of damp leaves and chimney smoke through quiet neighborhoods where life moved as though nothing unusual had happened. Children laughed behind white picket fences. Delivery trucks rolled past with cheerful holiday advertisements painted across their sides. Somewhere a church bell marked the top of the hour. The ordinary rhythm of the town felt strangely distant. She kept replaying the morning in her mind, not searching for excuses, but wondering whether she would make the same decision again if given another chance. The answer arrived before she reached the next intersection. Yes, she would. A warm cup of coffee had never seemed more valuable than it had in the hands of a man who expected nothing from anyone. Meanwhile, inside Maple and Ash Coffee, Ryan Mitchell gathered the afternoon staff near the register before the lunch crowd arrived. His expression remained firm, his posture straight, every button on his white shirt perfectly aligned. "Let this morning serve as a reminder," he said evenly. "Compassion is admirable, but procedures protect this business. If we begin making emotional decisions, we lose consistency. Consistency keeps doors open." Several employees exchanged uneasy glances, but nobody challenged him. Jessica lowered her eyes toward the espresso machine, pretending to polish the stainless steel surface while silently remembering Emily's smile as she left. Ryan interpreted their silence as agreement. "We all have difficult stories," he continued. "If customers need assistance, there are approved company programs. Individual employees do not get to decide." At that exact moment, the front door opened again. A man wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat stepped inside carrying nothing but a leather portfolio. He was somewhere in his early 50s, clean-shaven, composed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. He did not join the ordering line. Instead, he slowly looked around the cafe as though memorizing every detail before approaching the register. Jessica greeted him politely. "Good afternoon. What can I get started for you?" The man smiled pleasantly. "Nothing just yet. I am actually looking for the young woman who helped an older gentleman this morning." Jessica hesitated before answering. Ryan stepped forward almost immediately. "I am the store manager. Is there a problem?" The visitor shifted his attention without changing his calm expression. "Perhaps. I was hoping to speak with her directly." Ryan folded his arms. "She is no longer working today." "May I ask why?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "Policy violation." The man gave a slow, thoughtful nod as though filing away every word. "I see." He thanked Jessica, turned without another question, and quietly walked back outside. Ryan watched him through the windows until he disappeared down the sidewalk. Something about the conversation unsettled him, even though he could not explain why. Across town, Thomas Walker sat inside a modest brick building overlooking the river. There were no company logos on the entrance, no flashy signs, only polished wood floors, framed photographs from decades of community events, and a receptionist who greeted him with genuine warmth. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walker." He returned the smile with a simple nod before stepping into a private office where the same man from the cafe was already waiting. The leather portfolio rested unopened on the conference table. "I visited the store exactly as you requested," the man said. "Everything you described was accurate." Thomas removed his weathered baseball cap and placed it gently beside him. His pale blue eyes remained thoughtful rather than angry. And the young woman? The visitor paused before answering. She has been suspended without pay. A quiet silence settled across the room. Thomas looked toward the large windows where bare tree branches swayed gently against the cloudy afternoon sky. Finally he spoke, his voice calm enough to almost disappear beneath the soft ticking of an antique wall clock. Then it is time for everyone to remember what this company was built to stand for. Thomas Walker remained seated beside the conference room window long after the visitor finished speaking. The silence between them was neither awkward nor uncertain. It was the kind of silence built over decades by a man who had learned that important decisions should never be made while emotions were still loud. Outside, the river reflected the pale afternoon light, and a pair of ducks drifted slowly across the calm water as though the world had forgotten how to hurry. Thomas rested one hand on the polished oak table, his fingers tracing the faint grain in the wood. "Do you remember why we opened the first store?" he asked quietly. The visitor smiled faintly. "You asked me that question during my interview 22 years ago." Thomas nodded. "And your answer?" "You said coffee was never the product." Thomas looked toward him with gentle curiosity. "Go on." "You said people come in for warmth. Sometimes it is the coffee. Sometimes it is the conversation. Sometimes it is simply being treated like they matter." Thomas's eyes softened. "That was the only rule I cared about." His thoughts drifted backward more than 30 years to a rainy autumn morning when Maple and Ash had been nothing more than a tiny corner shop with 6 tables, mismatched chairs, and a second-hand espresso machine that rattled every time it steamed milk. He still remembered the handwritten sign taped inside the front window. "Welcome. Sit as long as you need." Those words had not come from a marketing consultant or an advertising agency. They came from his late wife, Eleanor, who believed that a neighborhood coffee shop should feel less like a business and more like a safe place. During those early years, they quietly paid for drinks when college students forgot their wallets. They handed warm coffee to exhausted paramedics finishing overnight shifts. They never advertised those moments because kindness lost something the moment it became publicity. Customers returned not because the coffee was perfect, but because they felt seen. Thomas smiled at the memory of Eleanor slipping homemade cookies on his saucers whenever she noticed someone eating alone. She always said that generosity was not measured by how much something cost. It was measured by whether someone needed it. The visitor watched the memories pass across Thomas's face without interrupting. Finally, Thomas opened the leather wallet he had carried for decades and removed a faded photograph. It showed a much younger Thomas and Eleanor standing proudly outside the original Maple and Ash Coffee beneath a freshly painted wooden sign. Their clothes were simple. Their smiles were genuine. The building behind them barely resembled the hundreds of modern locations now spread across the country. Thomas carefully placed the photograph on the table. "When I stepped away from daily operations, I told the board one thing." He paused. "Never allow growth to become more important than character." The visitor lowered his eyes. "Some people have forgotten." Thomas nodded almost sadly. "Success has a way of attracting managers who understand numbers better than people." He gently returned the photograph to his wallet before standing. Although 80 years had added careful slowness to his movements, there remained an unmistakable steadiness in the way he carried himself. "Schedule a regional leadership review tomorrow morning." "Already done." "Invite human resources, operations, and the regional vice president. They will all be there." Thomas reached for his weathered jacket hanging over the chair and slipped it on. "And Emily Carter?" The visitor answered immediately. "We have already confirmed her employment record. 3 years. Perfect attendance. Outstanding customer reviews. Not a single disciplinary issue before today." Thomas buttoned his jacket and smiled quietly. "Interesting. What is?" the visitor asked. Thomas looked once more toward the river before answering. "The company nearly lost its most valuable employee over the least expensive item on the menu." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a quiet certainty. Somewhere across town, Emily believed her future had begun to disappear that morning. She had no way of knowing that the values she had defended with one simple act of kindness had just awakened the very man who had built those values into the company from the beginning. Emily Carter slept very little that night. The apartment she shared with her mother was quiet except for the occasional rattle of the old heating vents and the soft ticking of a clock above the kitchen doorway. Before sunrise, she prepared oatmeal, organized her mother's morning medication, and forced herself to smile through a conversation she hoped sounded completely ordinary. She never mentioned the suspension. There would be time for difficult conversations later. For now, she simply promised she would spend the day looking for temporary work. Across town, Store 184 opened precisely at 6 o'clock. Ryan Mitchell unlocked the front doors, expecting another predictable morning. Fresh coffee filled the air. Display cases sparkled beneath warm lights. Employees moved through their opening routines with practiced efficiency, but something felt different. At exactly 7:45, a black sedan pulled quietly into the parking lot. Then another. 5 minutes later, a third vehicle arrived. None carried company logos. None attracted attention from customers who continued ordering breakfast sandwiches and lattes. Jessica noticed the unfamiliar visitors first. 3 professionally dressed men and 2 women entered together, each wearing discreet maple and ash identification badges clipped neatly inside tailored jackets. They did not stop at the register. They did not order coffee. Instead, they looked around the cafe with calm, observant expressions before one of them approached Ryan. "Good morning, Ryan Mitchell." Ryan offered a polite smile. "That is correct." The woman extended her hand. "Laura Bennett, Regional Vice President." Ryan's smile stiffened slightly. Regional leadership rarely visited without advance notice. Before he could ask why she was there, another man stepped forward carrying a slim leather portfolio. Daniel Brooks, Director of Human Resources. A third introduced himself as Michael Harper from Operations Compliance. The remaining 2 quietly observed every detail inside the store without speaking. Ryan felt the atmosphere change almost instantly. Employees slowed their movements without meaning to. Customers sensed something unusual but could not identify it. Laura remained courteous. "We would appreciate the use of your office." Ryan quickly led them through the staff hallway, trying to remain composed. Once the office door closed, Daniel placed a tablet computer on the desk, while Michael opened a folder containing printed reports. Laura looked directly at Ryan. Yesterday morning, an employee named Emily Carter was suspended. Ryan nodded confidently. "Correct. She knowingly violated company policy by distributing inventory without authorization." Laura did not respond immediately. Instead, she tapped a finger lightly against the folder. "Walk us through your decision." Ryan explained everything exactly as he had the previous day. Company procedures, inventory accountability, consistency, employee responsibility. He spoke clearly, believing every sentence strengthened his position. When he finished, silence filled the office. Michael finally turned the tablet screen toward Ryan. Security footage from the previous morning began playing. The video showed Emily handing the elderly customer a single paper cup before returning quietly to work. There was no confrontation, no disruption, no argument. Daniel looked up. Prior to yesterday, how many disciplinary actions had Emily Carter received? Ryan hesitated. None. Attendance issues? None. Customer complaints? None. Performance reviews? Ryan swallowed carefully. Excellent. Laura folded her hands. So one of the highest performing employees in your district lost her income over 1 medium coffee valued at less than $4. Ryan immediately replied, "It was never about the amount. It was about the policy." Laura studied him thoughtfully. "That depends on which policy you believe defines this company." Before Ryan could answer, Daniel's phone vibrated softly against the conference table. He glanced at the screen, stood respectfully, and looked toward Laura. "He has arrived." No one asked who he meant. Yet every person in the room instinctively straightened their posture as footsteps approached slowly from the hallway outside. The office door opened, and Thomas Walker entered wearing the same faded brown jacket, the same weathered baseball cap tucked neatly beneath one arm, and the same calm expression Ryan remembered from the previous morning. Only this time, every executive in the room rose to their feet before he spoke a single word. Ryan Mitchell remained standing, uncertain whether he should offer a greeting or an apology. Every executive in the office waited patiently until Thomas Walker reached the empty chair at the head of the conference table. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he rested his weathered baseball cap on the polished wood and slowly looked around the room. His pale blue eyes carried no anger, no disappointment, only the quiet weight of someone who had spent a lifetime observing people before judging them. Finally, He pulled out the chair and lowered himself into it. Only then did everyone else return to their seats. Ryan watched the exchange with growing confusion. He looked from Laura Bennett to Daniel Brooks, and then back to the elderly man he had dismissed less than 24 hours earlier. "I am sorry," Ryan said cautiously. "I do not believe we have been formally introduced." Laura answered before Thomas could speak. "No, you have not." She folded her hands on the table. "Ryan, this is Mr. Thomas Walker." Ryan forced a polite smile. "It is a pleasure to meet you again, sir." Nobody else smiled. Daniel quietly slid a leather folder across the table until it rested directly in front of Ryan. "Please open it." Ryan did. The first page contained a company history he had seen years earlier during management training. There was a photograph of a small neighborhood coffee shop with 6 wooden tables and a faded green sign above the entrance. Standing proudly beneath that sign was a young man beside a smiling woman. Ryan's eyes moved from the photograph to the elderly gentleman sitting only a few feet away. The resemblance was unmistakable. He looked again, slower this time, noticing the same steady eyes, the same quiet expression that decades could not erase. His throat tightened. Laura spoke softly. "Thomas Walker founded Maple and Ash Coffee 34 years ago." Ryan felt the room become strangely smaller. Daniel continued. "Although he stepped away from daily operations many years ago, he remains chairman emeritus and the company's largest individual shareholder." The words settled over the office like a silence that refused to leave. Ryan looked back at Thomas, remembering the worn jacket, the careful way he had counted empty pockets, the free cup of coffee, and the suspension he had signed only hours later. Every memory suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Thomas noticed the realization without showing satisfaction. "Yesterday," he said calmly, "I visited this store as an ordinary customer." His voice remained gentle enough that nobody needed to raise theirs in response. "I wanted to see whether our culture still lived inside these walls when nobody believed anyone important was watching." Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Thomas continued. "The coffee was excellent." He paused briefly. The kindness was even better. He looked toward the security monitor that still displayed the frozen image of Emily handing him the paper cup. "That young woman never asked who I was. She did not know my position. She did not expect recognition. She simply saw another human being who needed a little warmth on a cold morning." Thomas slowly folded his hands together. "Then she accepted the consequences without blaming anyone." Nobody interrupted. Outside the office window, employees continued serving customers, unaware that the conversation inside was quietly reshaping the future of the store. Thomas turned his attention back to Ryan. "Yesterday you believed you were protecting this company." Ryan lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir. Today I would like you to answer one question." Thomas leaned forward only slightly. "If the values that built this company can be overridden by the price of one medium coffee, then what exactly have we been protecting all these years?" Ryan stared silently at the table. For the first time since becoming store manager, he realized he had enforced every rule perfectly while forgetting the one principle that had made those rules worth following in the first place. Thomas Walker allowed the silence to settle naturally across the room. He had never believed that the loudest voice carried the greatest authority. Over the years, he had learned that truth often needed only a few quiet words before people began hearing themselves. Ryan Mitchell finally lifted his eyes. The confidence that had defined him only minutes earlier had faded into honest reflection. "I believed I was protecting consistency," he said softly. Thomas gave a small nod. "I know you did." There was no sarcasm in his reply, only understanding. Procedures matter. Accountability matters. But neither of them should ever become more important than the people they were designed to serve. Laura Bennett reached into her folder and placed another document on the conference table. "Following this review," she said calmly, "Emily Carter's suspension is being rescinded immediately." Ryan looked toward her in surprise. Daniel Brooks continued. "Her employment record will remain completely clear. Yesterday's disciplinary action will be removed from her personnel file." Ryan listened without speaking. Thomas rested one hand gently on the edge of the table. "That is the administrative correction," he said. "Now let us address the cultural one." He turned toward Laura. "Please ask Emily to come here." Less than an hour later, Emily stepped cautiously through the front entrance of Store 184. She had received a brief phone call requesting her presence, but no explanation. She expected paperwork. perhaps a final meeting before her employment officially ended. Instead, Jessica greeted her with wide eyes that seemed unable to decide whether to smile or cry. "They are waiting for you in the office," she whispered. Emily walked slowly down the familiar hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the office door, Daniel opened it with a welcoming smile. "Please come in." Emily froze. Sitting quietly beside the conference table was the elderly gentleman she had served the previous morning. Around him stood regional executives, human resources leaders, and Ryan Mitchell himself. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Thomas was the first to break the silence. "Good morning, Emily." She blinked in confusion. "Good morning, sir." Thomas smiled gently. "Yesterday you gave me a cup of coffee." Emily nodded carefully. "Yes, sir." "Why?" She answered without hesitation. "Because you looked cold." "Did you expect anything in return?" "No, sir." "Did you know who I was?" "No, sir." Thomas's smile grew warmer. "That is exactly why I asked you to come." He slowly stood. Although everyone in the room held positions of authority, their attention remained fixed entirely on him. "Emily," he said, "when my wife and I opened our first cafe, we hoped people would leave feeling more valued than when they walked in. Yesterday you protected that dream even after others forgot it." Emily lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected words. Thomas reached into the inside pocket of his faded jacket and removed the same worn photograph of the original maple and ash coffee. He handed it to her carefully. "That little shop became this company because people like you treated strangers with dignity before knowing whether they deserved it." Laura placed another folder on the table. "Emily Carter," she said with a smile. "Effective immediately, you are fully reinstated with back pay for every scheduled hour you missed. In addition, you are being promoted into our Community Experience Leadership Program, where you will help train future managers on customer culture and company values." Emily looked from the folder to Thomas, unable to find words. Ryan stepped forward quietly. His expression carried genuine humility. "Emily," he said, "I owe you an apology. I followed the handbook correctly, but I failed to lead wisely. I hope you will forgive me." Emily looked at him for a long moment before offering the same gentle smile that had greeted customers every morning for 3 years. "We all learn, Mr. Mitchell." Thomas watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. It was never the coffee that needed correcting. It had always been the understanding of what that coffee was truly meant to represent. The following Monday morning, the first customers arriving at store 184 noticed something new beside the register. It was not a promotion, a seasonal drink, or a colorful advertisement. Framed in simple oak would hung a small handwritten message that every guest could read while waiting for their coffee. It said, "The greatest thing we serve is not coffee. It is the reminder that every person who walks through our doors matters." Nobody signed the message. There was no corporate logo beneath it. Yet before long, employees throughout the district began requesting copies for their own stores. Emily Carter returned to her familiar place behind the espresso machine before sunrise, wearing the same green apron she had folded so carefully only days earlier. The difference was invisible to most customers, but everyone working beside her could feel it. She still greeted every guest with the same warm smile. She still remembered favorite orders without asking. She still moved with the same quiet efficiency. Only now, when new employees arrived for training, managers often asked Emily to share the story that could never be found in the employee handbook. She always told it the same way. She never mentioned promotions. She never mentioned executives. She never spoke about embarrassment or apologies. She simply reminded them that policies guide people, but character defines them. Ryan Mitchell remained store manager. Thomas Walker had insisted upon it after several long conversations that nobody else ever heard. Ryan accepted additional leadership coaching, visited the original maple and ash coffee preserved as a small company museum, and spent hours reading letters written decades earlier by customers whose lives had been touched by simple acts of kindness. Gradually, his leadership changed. He still valued accountability, but he began asking different questions before making difficult decisions. Instead of asking only whether a rule had been followed, he also asked whether the outcome reflected the values the company claimed to represent. Months later, customers noticed something unexpected. Employees smiled more naturally. Conversations lasted a little longer. The cafe somehow felt warmer, even on the coldest winter mornings. One snowy afternoon, Thomas Walker quietly returned to store 184, wearing the same faded brown jacket and weathered baseball cap. No executives accompanied him. No announcements preceded his arrival. He simply joined the line behind several construction workers and a young mother holding the hand of her little daughter. When it was finally his turn, Emily looked up and recognized him immediately. They exchanged the same quiet smile as old friends. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walker," she said. "The usual?" Thomas nodded. "If you would be so kind." Emily prepared the medium black coffee exactly as before and placed it gently on the counter. Thomas reached into his wallet and handed her exact change. Emily looked at the bills for a moment before smiling. "You know," she said softly, "there are people who would probably insist this one should be free." Thomas chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to belong naturally among the aroma of fresh coffee beans and cinnamon pastries. "Perhaps," he replied, "but some things are worth paying for, especially when they remind us why they matter." He picked up the paper cup with both hands, thanked her sincerely, and walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, he turned back for one brief moment. The cafe buzzed with ordinary life. Milk steamed. Cups clinked softly against saucers. Customers chatted over breakfast while sunlight spilled through the front windows onto polished wooden tables. Nothing about the scene looked extraordinary. That was exactly what made it beautiful. Kindness had quietly become part of the store again, not because anyone had ordered it, but because one person had chosen to protect it when it was easiest to look away. Thomas smiled to himself and disappeared into the crisp afternoon air, leaving behind nothing more than the gentle aroma of fresh coffee and a lesson that would outlast every cup ever served. Respect is never measured by the price of what we give. It is measured by the dignity we choose to protect when nobody believes it will matter.